Hello, my fellow readers. I, Dark Symphony 777, with another fan fiction review. Yes, I look exhausted, so hell to deal with it. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, and leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story. And finally, this is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. So, the story I'm reviewing this time is History Lesson by Was Mowin. I don't know, half the time I think fanfiction authors just make up their names as they go. I don't know, like I was through like half the author's minds were like, okay, that's my name. Thirsty. So it's a Steven Universe story. I was actually suggested this story by a subscriber, and despite the fact it's probably the shortest, because I read other Steven Universe stories before, and not counting, and despite the fact this one's like just under 50,000 words, the story's actually probably the best one I reviewed. I mean, don't even bother, boring. Tourmaline, serviceable, and you know it was on the top 10 fanfiction reviews from last year for a reason, but you know, at the end of the day, it's only like slightly above average. This one's actually not bad in terms of plotting, characters, and all that jazz. So let's start with like an interesting thing. When I first actually saw the synopsis, I literally thought the story was actually going to be like a bunch of stuff that happened in history, and the crystal gems are just there. That's honestly what I thought was going to happen. I was like, oh, that's actually not a bad idea. Like a series of one-shots of like various historical events, and the crystal gems are there. I thought that's actually not a bad idea. But no, this is something different. We do get something like that for like the first couple chapters, where it's the events of the Cold War, and I think a couple chapters of various events in history. Like the first chapter one was during the Cold War, and then we had like I think we had Vietnam. I think there was a chapter in Vietnam. It's been a while since I read these, and like I said, half of these stories I tend to like. They seem to like. I try to hopefully remember all of them. No, not. Cold War and 9/11, and the rest of it's just kind of building up to modern day. So the past part of it is the crystal gems. They're defending Beach City from all these crystal abominations. They meet a general. He tells her it's like, I like your spunk, and then like Pearl slaps him across the face. And all these things, and then it kind of comes up with like Rose Quartz meets Steven's father. I'm trying to remember what his name was. Greg? Yeah, Greg. She gets pregnant. She has the kid, and Pearl decides I don't want him to learn all these what happened throughout history and all this stuff because I want to protect him. It's a simple plot. So one day during Beach City. And yes, before you ask, I did deliberately leave out one specific part from the past. I'll mention in a little bit. Steven meets this guy named Tibbets, and Tibbets is basically a military man. He starts teaching Steven all these military things, like a song about a guy whose parachute failed. I don't know the context of that. I'm not an expert in the military, so don't blame me for if I'm just getting facts about that wrong. And all these information, he wants to teach him about World War I, World War II, and stuff like that. Pearl finds out, doesn't particularly like it, and so they try and talk to each other about it. They invite Tibbets to the temple. They get into an argument. Tibbets leaves. Garnet gets sick from radiation poisoning that was caused by something. Now, this is why I wanted to mention it now. At the beginning of the stories, we're introduced to these creatures called burners, and they're basically living uranium deposits. And they're basically like humanoid gem monster abominations that basically leak uranium. Now, I don't know much about uranium. What I do know is uranium is a very, very irradiated. It could literally kill people. Like, if you're not wearing like if you're not wearing actual protection, you would actually literally die just by being near it. Like, you literally cannot even be remotely near it unless you are completely protected as much as you can, and even then you still have to take like a lot of protection, because you could still actually get radiation poisoning and death by radiation just by being near it, even with protection. The crystal gems, they're more resistant to it, being, they're not really human, but they can still get sick, which is what happens. So Garnet gets sick, gets radiation poisoning. Pearl manages to find out what's causing it, and she basically sucks the radiation out of her and purifies it, which is basically what Rose Quartz did, which is actually in this story kind of how she died. Kind of the implication of how she died, like her constantly absorbing the radiation and purifying it, kind of caught up to her a couple years down the road, and that catching up to her, as well as birthing Stephen, kind of. So Stephen wants to learn the past. He wants to learn what happened during World War I, during World War II, and all that. And it's a very nice lesson on the phrase, "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it," because that's actually a very poignant lesson. That's actually something that it's actually one of my favorite quotes. I think Churchill said it. Let me actually look. Let me actually. Okay, so I just looked it up. So Churchill did in fact quote it. However, he wasn't the person who coined the term. It was actually a Spanish philosopher named George Santayana, who actually said those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, and then it kind of just morphed into the more well-known phrase of those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat. That's basically what it's become. However, George, I actually didn't know that. That's actually interesting. However, the phrase is more associated to Churchill, so potato potato. So we kind of find out that Tibbets is actually a sort of baby sort of thing. Like, bear with me. Baby of a Nazi experiment to create an artificial crystal gem using other crystal gems that they kidnapped, people, and uranium. And so what they did was, and so eventually after a long time, they actually managed to eventually do it. Like, it was called Project Block August. They basically created this whole, they wanted to create a crystal gem so that way they helped them against the war. However, the crystal gems, they technically are under oath that they can't get involved in human conflict, because then they'll actually, then it would cause a lot of catastrophe by themselves. They can't get involved. So they make sorry. And then they do eventually manage to make one. It kills Calcite, eats the gemstone, and then let's see. So sorry, I was just double checking what happened. So what happened was the false crystal gem, they killed a bunch of crystal gems, she ate it, and then she kind of fell apart, and then basically turned into a baby. And so that's basically how this false crystal gem has been surviving over all these years. Like, she would constantly kill a bunch of gems across the world, eat them, and then kind of reborn in order to try and survive, so it can eat rose quartz's gem, because apparently it's more of a refined gem, and so it can actually kind of withstand and actually last along, because it's constantly burning through the gems and constantly. So that she like starts as a stick figure, but as she eats more gems, she gets like a fuller figure, and acts very very much like a Trollope. It's very disturbing, and that's basically it. With that, so the climax. Sorry for kind of being all over the place. I'm actually kind of have a big headache right now. Excuse me. There's a climax. All the crystal gems fight the false crystal gem once when she kind of gets out of Tibbet's body. Tibbet's really didn't actually wanted to fight against her. Because surprise, surprise, Tibbet was actually the grandson of the general from the very first chapter. Nice continuity, and she manages to fight. She curb stomps the crystal gem. Like, they realize that they can't really do a lot of damage, mainly because of the whole irradiation, and just being near her is actually kind of causing pain and kind of causing to kind of peeking up. She actually kills Steven, eats Steven, becomes like a sort of like slutty version of Rose Quartz for like a couple minutes, and while Steven's inside, let's see, what was her name? What was her? God dang, what was I can't remember. What was her? Gesiel. I think that's what her name said in chapter 19. Gesiel. Gesiel kills Steven, eats the gem, turns into a very slutty version of Rose Quartz, starts messing with the crystal gems. However, Steven, with the help of Tibbet, her along with like all the bunch of the previous body she's inhabited, kind of want to fight her and want to get rid of her. And so, they do the whole fusion thing, and there's even a humorous moment where it's like, and Steven's like, we gotta dance to fuse. And Tibbet's like, I ain't pansy. What are we, how are we gonna fuse? Women do the fusion by dancing. We, the men, do things by overly complicated hand gestures. and then they just shake to like an overcomplicated handshake, and that's how they fuse. And so they turn into like this big army-esque crystal gem, because they get Amethyst and Garnet and Pearl to join up with them, and they manage to kill Gesiel, and then Tibbet kind of dies away, and then the story ends with Pearl reconsidering her thoughts on just teaching Steven more about history and more dark aspects. And for a under 50,000 word plot, the idea and the actual plot itself is actually not badly executed. It's like the whole idea of this false crystal gem slowly getting rid of all the crystal gems across Earth, as she's constantly trying to feed herself. She kind of eats, and she's more or less a cannibal. Like, she has no morals. She's actually not a badly written villain, despite the fact she only really appears for like the last couple chapters. She's not bad. She's not bad. The whole build up to her was actually not bad, especially the whole idea with Nazi side, because because those wacky Nazis, the Nazis. And always do it like experimentation. Usually when there's some kind of science stuff, it has to do with World War II. Then it's not. Then they're kind of always involved. But the core idea of Steven wanting to learn history, and Pearl kind of shielding it from him because of legitimate reasons, and Steven wanting to learn about these darker parts of history, because, let's be honest, real life is dark. You can shield your children and other people as much as you want, but sooner or later they're going to have to get used to the fact that it's not sunshine and rainbows. And that's actually what I like about this story, is the fact it's presenting this core idea in a way that kind of fits the world of Steven Universe. Because, think about it, the Crystal Gems, they lived through World War I, they lived through World War II, they lived through the Cold War, Vietnam, 9/11, all these very bad catastrophes, and they realized that and it was more or less just Pearl. Like Garnet's like, and Amethyst actually wants to tell Steven, but she kind of, but not Garnet, Pearl kind of has authority, authority on that, so he's like, gag order, can't really say anything. But Pearl only wants to do it to protect Steven because she made a promise to Rose Quartz right before she gave birth, that to protect Steven, so she kind of thought all these darker aspects would technically be protecting him from the world, but then he also wants to learn it. Like, that's a real lesson that, honestly, that should be told more in kids' cartoons. Me and Starlet Duck actually had a mention, and one of the things, don't worry, I'm going off topic, but this is actually relevant. And one of the things we talked about was, like, the idea that parents or moral guardians are trying to completely kidify children's TV shows to the point of just being overly saccharine, all because it's for the kids. And I said that honestly, there's some merit to that. I even mentioned there's some merit, like some children's shows, when they do get into darker territories, sometimes they do kind of go too far. Like, there's kids, like you don't want to go overboard. Like, you see all these kids playing like all these violent stuff and watching horror movies. That's kind of, it's a bit too much, but it's like, but kind of showing them that it can't be all sunshine and rainbows. Like, sometimes some hardships are going to happen, all this sort of things. It's going to happen. And I even mentioned Hey Arnold. Like anyone in the comment section, has anyone ever seen Hey Arnold? I freaking love that show, that cartoon. It was one of my favorite cartoons, and it's actually a perfect example of having a kid show that did have darker material, did have darker themes and but still kind of retained that whole kid aspect to it. So it didn't shy away from it, but it told it in a way that kids would still understand. Like, there was the Christmas special with Dr. Hien. Honestly, when are you gonna see another cartoon even mention the Vietnam War? Like, honestly, you're never really gonna see that. And the fact that they didn't shy away from the fact that Vietnam happened, it's still told in a way that it happened, but but he's trying to get over that, and he's trying to find, and honestly, just watch the Christmas special of Harold. That's probably my favorite Christmas special of all time. But I'm going off topic. But I'm going far off topic. But what I'm trying to say is the core idea behind the story is executed pretty well with the phrase, "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it." And that's a noble lesson, and the idea of telling this lesson through Steven, who was kind of sheltered, and him kind of not only wanting to learn these things because he wants to know the reality of what's going on around him. Like, he kind of knows there's darker stuff, but he wants to know the graphic. But all the dark stuff kind of relates to crystal gems. He wants to know what dark stuff did happen with humanity, which is understandable. And Tibbets is there to help him kind of teach him that stuff. In terms of the characters are, again, they're not bad. They fit what the story's trying to do. Really, the only, more or less, I kind of already talked about all the characters in the plot. Excuse me. I kind of more or less already talked about the characters in the plot, like Steven, Tibbets, Giselle, Pearl. More or less, those were like the main characters. So I already kind of talked about them. But more or less, they all served the purpose of trying to teach you this lesson, and they do that job very well. Pacing. It's a very short story. Like I said, it's under 50,000 words. It's 26 chapters. But I read this in like 30 minutes. And it didn't drag. Like, you wouldn't expect a story like this to kind of be paced as fast as it is and still make a lot of sense in the material it's trying to tell. It's all the chapters are very short. They they're not long, because it's trying to tell a very less a story and more an idea. And again, that idea is make sure to know about the darker aspects of history, because if not, then it's just going to keep repeating over and over and over and over again. And honestly, people need to learn this lesson. They really do. Then comes the bad thing. The grammar. Oh. And there's one aspect of the story I didn't like. It's the grammar. Honestly, this story kind of reads like someone with like gigantic fingers who are trying to type a story on a phone that was way too small. Generally, grammar-wise, it's not bad. It's the formatting. I have a feeling that if not for the fact the author kind of know how to kind of space sentences and stuff like that, the story would probably be just one gigantic wall of text. It would be just completely... Actually, it's weird. Okay, so chapter 1, it seems fine, and then you get, at the beginning, October 26, 1962. The Cold War is in full swing with the Americans, Soviets, and now the Cubans all aiming their nuclear weapons at each other. As the dark cloud of World War III seemed to be drawing closer each day, the Crystal Gems had been busy fighting off waves of crystal beasts that were emerging out of the... sorry. My mom started being my mom. The Crystal Gems had been busy fighting off waves of crystal beasts that were emerging from out of the ocean. And instead of, they do the paragraph and then space again, so that way, it kind of reads naturally. It's just a space and then just the next sentence. I honestly, I legitimately think that the author had a very nasty habit of just constantly wanting to space every single sentence that he does, and just try and do that. Like I said, it was either that or he basically just one gigantic text. It's bad. It's really bad. I'm not a grammar Nazi. I don't particularly care, unless there's a lot of grammar errors, I don't particularly care. But this is honestly just too much for me. This is just sheer exasperation. And that's kind of sad, because this is a good story. It's not a story per se. It's an idea, and it's trying to teach a simple lesson. But good God, the formatting of the story is just so bad. I'm lucky I actually read this story on the fanfiction app on my phone, because otherwise, if I read this story through my laptop, this would have taken so much longer. It would have taken far longer than it had any right to be. Oh boy. So, would I recommend this story? Yes. Again, it's a simple enough premise that's executed really well. It's the idea that's executed really well. Like I said, the characters, they're not bad, but they service the story that they kind of needed to be more simplified. They're not deep characters. It's just, here's something Pearl's doing, here's something Steven's doing. They argue, Tippett's involved, he starts arguing with Pearl, and then they fight, and then that's it. There's no deep characters to this, except maybe Gisiel. I talked about her long enough. And Gisiel is actually a pretty interesting concept as a villain, being an artificial crystal gem who basically has to cannibalize the other, be a cannibal in order to actually live. And she has a sadistic streak. She's also had kind of like a troll op, very erotic, rubbing herself, kind of moaning and stuff like that. It's very weird, but it kind of fits the whole idea of the fake crystal gem. You have all these crystal gems, very wholesome, and then you have the fake one who's just purposely being lewd to kind of show the contrast between the two. But yeah, the idea is fine. The characters, they're not great, but they service the story enough that you can't really, they're not really bad characters. The pacing is fine. Favorite part? Ooh, I really do like mainly the idea, mainly the reveal of what happened with the Crystal Gem. Like, you know, so basically it was chapter 18. It was basically a chapter revolving around Garnet. Garnet wakes up. She finally realizes that, you know, she's been cured, and now she's trying to find out what happened. She's trying to find out the history of what happened. So she watches an old DVD that she found in Steven's backpack, and it's kind of like a bunch of hidden clues that Rose Quartz left, and slowly trying to start piecing together. And the reveal of the false crystal gem was actually done pretty well, all things considered. Like I said, I don't hate anything about the story except for the formatting, and that's really the only thing I would want to change. Wes Melwin, you need to have someone edit the story. You need to have someone just clean up the formatting and fix the formatting out. That's it. Like, you can, and theoretically, you could still do the idea of like a bunch of one shots of like the crystal gems watching various world events through history, and then, you know, just giving their opinions on it. That you can still do that, but that'd be like its own story rather than this. You can expand it if you want. There's like a lot of stuff you can do. You can kind of go more into the burners. You can go more into like the arguments of Stephen and Pearl and with Tibbets. There's a lot you can do. It's fine as it is. So theoretically, you don't really need to change anything except fix the formatting. But it's fine. I give it. It's not gonna win Pulitzers or anything like that. If there's any like fan fiction awards outside of the fannies. But as is, it's just good. It's good. Not great. So that is my review of History Lesson. Yeah, this one's not. I was expecting this one to be shorter because there was really a lot to talk about, honestly. So this has been Dark Symphony 777, and cut.